Hi, I'm Stacy, and I'm going to talk to you about basic sewing supplies. If you've been sewing for a while, or if you're brand new to this, if you sew with a machine or by hand, there's some supplies that every sewist will need. So we're going to start with the to me, one of the most important things, and that's scissors. These are my Ginger scissors. They only are used on fabric. I do not cut anything, not paper, not tissue paper. I'm even cautious about what fabrics. If the fabric has a metal thread in it, I probably won't use my gingers on it. I've had these since 1992, actually 1991, when I was in college. So back in fashion school, I bought these, and they're my treasure. I've never even had to sharpen them. I use them very carefully. If they're weighted perfectly, if the screw is perfectly tight, they're good for life. You can sharpen these if you make sure you take them to somebody very reputable. I actually had 2 pairs of Ginger. I went ahead and bought a second pair because I was fearful something would happen to these. So now I just have 2 really great pair of scissors. If you are left-handed, you can buy these left-handed. You can also, if you're just starting out and you don't want to invest in a more expensive pair of scissors, you can buy inexpensive. These are Fiskars. These are left-handed scissors. If you're right-handed or left-handed, it really matters to have the appropriate handle for your hand. I'm right-handed, but I keep left-handed because I teach sewing, and I always have a student show up who's been using tools for somebody else for a long time, and their precision is off. You cannot cut an accurate pattern with the wrong tools, so make sure you have a good pair of scissors. Fiskars are fine. There are other inexpensive brands. They are sharp. They don't stay as sharp as long, but they're a great beginner scissor, and if you dedicate, like you can write on there, fabric only, and then hide them or threaten your family not to use them for anything else. If you do that, they do last a lot longer. I actually have a totally different scissor that I use for pattern only or paper only, and that's the best way to keep your scissors sharp and protected, and they won't get nicks. So scissors, vital. Here's another kind of scissor. This is a little nip scissor, little tiny scissor, or a little embroidery scissor. I keep these by my sewing machine for trimming threads. My machine does have thread cutters on it, and which I do use. It even has an automatic thread cutter that cuts it really close, but I don't always use that, and I do like to have the option of precisely cutting my tails exactly where I want them when I'm at the machine. It's also great when you're hand stitching and you need to cut off of your spool, or if you're using an embroidery thread, something like that. So I like super sharp, nice little thread nips, and these come in so many beautiful designs and styles. I actually have a different pair right here. See, they're cute. I have a stork pair. There's a lot of different designs, which is really fun about sewing supplies. They're often beautiful too. So that's another thing you might want. This scissor, sometimes it's called a duck bill scissor. It's an applique scissor, and you can see that it has this big wide top part and this very skinny bottom part, and it's meant for trimming away fabrics and threads when you're appliquing. It also can be used if you do like machine embroidery at the machine. It's got an offset handle, so you can see how if you would lay it on inside an embroidery hoop, something like that, how it's much easier to get in. So that's what these are. These are especially scissor. Not everyone will need them. If you do applique, if you're a quilter, if you like to do machine applique, if you do lace insets where you're going to trim it away like in underwear or beautiful lingerie, something like that, these are a really good investment. So duckbill or applique scissors. So those are the types of scissors. Another thing you're going to need is an unsewing tool. This is a seam ripper. If you have a sewing machine, or if you buy a little sewing kit, it'll often have a small little tiny seam ripper that has a lid. You can pop the lid off and put it on the bottom and make it a little longer. They're great. They work fine. They're a little hard to use because they're so tiny. I buy these giant ones that fit nicely in the hand and are much easier to use. I buy them in bulk because even after all these years of sewing, I started when I was 8. I'm 48, so that's been a long time. You still make mistakes, or you find that you didn't like the stitch, or it was an ugly color, or your machine made a mistake, or whatever. You got to unsew. I don't call it ripping, it just sounds terrible. So we unsew. We fix our mistakes, just like you use an eraser with a pencil. You use a seam ripper when you sew, but I unsew. Another thing that's very important You need a pin cushion, something to put your pins in. This is one I made. This is one that I bought. I have a lot of supplies from Hobby Lobby. If you have a Hobby Lobby near you, you might recognize some of these. This is a Hobby Lobby wrist pin cushion. It actually, this goes over your wrist like this so that you can pin into it, which works great. I seldom do that because I use extra long pins, and you probably won't be able to see this, but the pin actually will come all the way through, and you can stab yourself in the wrist. Because I do use extra long pins. I seldom put this on my wrist. I just end up becoming a pin cushion myself. But I like this size, and it's convenient and small and easy to carry around with me. So pin cushions are vital. You will buy pins, usually in a box like this. Do not continue to use it this way. Transfer your pins to a pin cushion. You become more efficient, and it's more practical, and you're less likely to spill your pins all over the floor, all over your project. You're not going to have your cat or dog accidentally getting a pin in their paw or their mouth, or your husband or child or whatever. So it's just a safer way. It's much safer to use this. I don't have one with me, but they actually make magnetic pin cushions. They just look like a dish, but they have a magnet inside, and the pin cushions just stick to it. That's a wonderful thing to have if you do have a pin spill, especially because you can just run your magnet over it, and all your pins will stick in it. And they actually, because of the magnet, they arrange themselves north and south too, which makes it pretty easy to use. I still like this old-fashioned one, but I always keep a magnetic one around just for accidents and spills or for quick cleanup. So, pin cushion. Now we got to put something in our pin cushion, and that's pins. And you can see I have these flat-headed pins. I have a couple different kinds in my pin cushions, and they're extra long. It may be hard to see that, but they're really, really long pins. This is sort of what a traditional pin, and I don't know how easy that's going to be for you guys to see, but see how tiny it is, and it has a little bitty head on it. That's sort of a traditional sewing pin. Sometimes it'll have a metal head. I'm just going to tell you, as a biased person who's been sewing for a long time, they're the worst kind of pins there are out there. I always buy extra long, extra sharp pins. If you're sewing quilts for your home or for clothing, those little tiny pins are just a pain. They are very hard to see at the machine to pull out. It's much more likely you're going to sew over a pin, break a pin, cut a pin when you're stitching out when they're tiny with a tiny head. I buy extra long, plus they usually aren't very sharp, especially the ones with the metal heads. They're usually almost like a little nail, and they'll make holes in your fabric. I just don't love them. Invest in a little bit more expensive pin. These are Hobby Lobby ones. They're Sewology. The nice thing about Hobby Lobby is they always have a 40% coupon. They also run sales all the time, and they'll say all Sewology 40% off or 50% off. And I just stock up. The same with Joann Fabrics. If you have a local fabric store, they usually do 2 to 3 times a year a Notion sale. Stock up then. Go in and get your pins, get your sewing machine needles, get all of the things that we're talking about today. You can buy on sale pretty much. Just follow your ads. You can also sign up for coupons, another way to save money. So buy some decent quality, good pins. You'll be so grateful when it's time to start sewing. You'll see a huge difference in your stitching at your machine and when you're cutting out with good pins. These are plastic headed, which are great. These are quilting pins, but I still like them for sewing. The only thing about plastic headed pins is if you're doing a lot of pressing at the machine with a pin, for some reason, if you have like a bias stitch and you've got it all pinned in and you're pressing, you want to make sure you don't press over the pin head. You don't anyway, but especially if it's plastic, because you could melt your plastic. You could melt it to your iron and to your fabric and destroy your project. So you don't want to iron over plastic heads. The solution, if you feel like you're going to really be ironing a lot with your pins in the fabric, is to get some like these. These are glass-headed, extra long silk pins. These are made for silk fabric, so they're super fine. They're nice and long, and they have a glass head. It won't melt. It will leave a little divot where your iron was, but it won't permanently damage your fabric by putting plastic on it. So that's option for you also. All of my pins I buy when they're on sale. I don't think I've bought pins full price in 15 years. I just don't. I think ahead. I plan ahead. I love to go. I always check the sewing notions whenever there's a sale just to see if there's something I might need. So I have extra boxes all the time because pins wear out. Pins get burrs in them and they're no good anymore. I don't have one here with me. I wish I'd thought to bring one. If you buy just the tomato pin cushion at the store, and they come in all kinds of cute colors, it'll have a little tomato and it have a string, and at the end of the string is a strawberry. And the tomato and the strawberry are filled with different things. The tomato's meant just to hold your pins and it's nice and firm and stout. But the strawberry, if you buy a halfway quality pin cushion is filled with special little, it's like a sand. It actually takes the burrs off of your needles and pins. So that it's, even if you don't use it for anything else, you really want to get one of those tomato pin cushions with the little strawberry on the end, and you just take your pins and you put them in and out of the strawberry like this, and it takes any little burrs out. Now some pins aren't savable, some pins just need to be tossed, but and I actually keep a pin cushion for pins that I don't use that I'm going to toss, so I don't just toss pins straight into the trash. I have a pin cushion they go into, and when it gets just completely filled, I toss the whole pin cushion. You can get them cheap. So that's one of my little tricks, so that I'm not potentially hurting somebody who's taking in the trash, taking out the trash. I don't want the guy at the trash at the street who's handling my trash cans. I don't want anyone to get injured with pins or anything like that, because pin sewing is full of sharp objects. So that's what you have to be careful. I even put my sewing machine pins or needles when they get bad in there. So that's pins. You'll need some hand sewing needles at some point. Some people love to hand sew, some people don't. When we get to the hand sewing video, I'm going to show you some tricks that might help you like hand sewing a lot more. It has a lot to do with the threads that you choose and the needle that you choose. So if you just choose, using whatever you happen to have around, you might be less happy. So once you get good quality supplies to work with, it might change your mind about hand stitching. So you will need hand sewing needles, and I'm going to do a whole video just on hand sewing needles and machine needles, because there's so many out there and there's a reason, and it'll help you know what to buy for the project that you're working on. So you definitely want hand sewing needles. You always want some safety pins. I have mine stuck in my pin cushion. So here's a safety pin. It's surprising how many things, especially if you're working with elastic, safety pins are really wonderful. They're also good sometimes for fitting if you're working with children or somebody who's, you don't trust them to take a garment on and off with straight pins in it. You can use safety pins for fitting the garment. I also can't live without my tape measures. I think I have about 15 tape measures. It's inches on one side and metrics on the other, or it has metrics on the bottom on this one. Sometimes it's reversed, and you just need this for everything. I always keep it around my neck when I'm sewing. This is how I look all the time, and I have worn it to the grocery store. Hobby Lobby sees me in this all the time because I forget it's on, especially because I usually have it under my hair, and I just wear it. It's on me all the time. You have to be careful if it is on you all the time. You could drag it into things. You can also accidentally cut it off, which I have a lot of seam rippers that are missing their ends because I've cut them off. So, tape measure, not seam ripper. So you need a good, I'd get a couple good tape measures. I have, this is my ruler. I always keep it beside my sewing machine. This is, and it's going to be hard to see because it is clear, it has blue markings on it. They come in a couple different colors. This is a 2-inch wide ruler, and it's 18 inches long, and it's marked off every 1/8 of an inch. And I use this for checking hemming. I use this for checking seam allowance. I use this all the time at the machine, but I also use it for all my pattern making and pattern alterations. And this is just, and the clear with the markings on top makes it so much easier to use than just a regular straight edge or a regular ruler. So this, if you're sewing very much at all, doing pattern alterations, I use this when I do curtains a lot. Love this thing. This is, for me, one of my top sewing tools that I use all the time. And the last thing I have here is tailor's chalk. And this is for marking on fabric. It marks on the fabric and then it just dusts right off. And I buy them in boxes. There's lots of different kinds of tailor's chalk that you can buy. The boxes I buy come with white, yellow, red, and blue in it, so you can use a contrasting color for your fabric. And that's all it's for. It's just for marking on your fabric. It's great for temporary lines, for top stitching, for marking hems, for doing slight alterations. They break very easily. I have one here for you to see. This one just snapped in half, which means now I have 2 pieces of tailor's chalk. When in the classroom, I just pretty much only have chalk chunks. And the kids are always like, "Oh no, Mrs. Robbins, I broke your tailor's chalk," which happens all the time. And I'm like, well, now we have more to share. Just, it's fine. I love a nice solid piece. I think it looks pretty, but it's still usable. You can actually sharpen the edges of these if you want to get really fine. Don't use your good sewing scissors to do it. Use your scissors or an awl or other things. You can even use your ruler edge because it's so soft, and you can just shave it off a little bit, make it really nice and fine for marking. So those are my basic sewing supplies that I can't live without, that I have always by my sewing machine for everyday sewing, and I pretty much use these for every project. I do a lot of clothing, but I also do a lot of houseware. I do a little bit of quilting, and I use these for all of those projects. All right, next time we're going to talk a little bit about threading our machines. I'm going to have my machine, but I'm also going to have another basic machine. So you can see two different machines, and we're going to talk about all the parts. So you'll have to tune in for that video. Thank you.